The record shows you logged in at 3:12. That detail will matter later. You are stationed at Al Udeid Air Base, 18 miles southwest of Doha, and you have been here long enough to stop thinking about what it means to be here. That is the first thing the record shows, not fear, familiarity, the kind that makes you slow. The night of the strike, your shift had been running for 4 hours. You were managing flight ops coordination in the Combined Air Operations Center, the CAOC, the nerve hub that routes everything the U.S. Air Force and coalition partners do across the Middle East theater. Screens everywhere, most of them green. You had checked 3 of them twice, not because something was wrong, because it was a long night, and that is what you do when nothing is wrong. Witnesses later described the 0312 login as routine. It was routine. That is the point. What the reconstruction shows is this. The strike was not sudden. It was patient. The sequence of events leading to that night had been building for 11 days. 11 days of Iranian posturing that U.S. Central Command had been grading as elevated but not imminent. That word, imminent. It will show up again in the after action. Here is what you knew that night. There had been drone incidents over the Red Sea. There had been a missile test in the Strait of Hormuz that intelligence flagged as a capability demonstration, not a prelude. There had been a briefing at 1800 that said the threat posture was elevated. You sat through it. You went back to your station. You logged in at 3:12. Here is what you did not know. The elevated classification had been updated at 2:47. Nobody pushed it to your screen. The base itself is not what civilians picture when they hear military base. Al Udeid is not a quiet installation. It is a city inside a fence. More than 10,000 American personnel, coalition forces from multiple countries, squadrons of aircraft, whose exact composition the Air Force does not always discuss publicly. The flight line is enormous. The CAOC building is hardened concrete. It is designed to survive. The engineering rationale says so in writing. What engineering rationale cannot account for is saturation. You will learn that word in the weeks after. Saturation. When the volume of incoming threats exceeds what any system, radar, interceptor pool, response sequencing, can address simultaneously. It is not a failure of the system. It is the deliberate exploitation of the system's boundaries. You will sit in rooms where people explain this calmly, with charts. You will nod. You will not say what you are thinking, which is that nobody explained it that calmly on the night it happened. The reconstruction places the first confirmed radar contact at 3:31, surface-to-surface ballistic trajectory, originating from western Iranian territory. Patriot batteries at the perimeter registered the contact. The intercept sequence initiated within seconds. That part worked exactly as designed. The second contact registered 14 seconds later. The third came in 40 seconds after that. By the time the fourth and fifth were confirmed simultaneously, the word saturation had become an operational condition rather than a planning concept. You would not know this for another 6 minutes, because the alert that should have reached your station was delayed by a system handshake failure that the investigation later described as a known intermittent issue that had been flagged for maintenance 7 weeks prior. 7 weeks. That detail is in the record too, buried in an appendix. A maintenance request marked low priority, routed through a queue that ran behind schedule through the autumn rotation cycle. Nobody ignored it. Nobody acted on it. It sat. That is a different kind of failure. The kind that has no one responsible person. The kind that belongs to the system in a way the system has no mechanism to acknowledge. What you remember is sound, not sirens first. That is the thing witnesses consistently describe that the official timeline cannot fully account for. Not sirens. A concussive pressure in the air that arrived before the alarm, before the lights changed, before anyone spoke. A physical fact reaching you through the walls of a hardened building before any system confirmed it. Your body registered what your screen had not yet shown you. The first detonation struck approximately 400 meters from the CAOC building. The reconstruction cannot be more precise than that because the physical evidence was processed across 3 separate investigation teams with slightly different measurement methodologies. What is consistent across all 3 reports? The CAOC sustained no structural damage. The hardening held. The design philosophy proved itself. What is also in the record, 2 personnel were injured outside the building in the 30 seconds between the first concussion and the formal shelter-in-place order. They had stepped out during a shift change, a routine thing, a thing that happens every night at Al Udeid at that hour, a thing that happened at the wrong 30 seconds. You did not know any of this yet. You were pulling on body armor that had been sitting in the same corner for 9 months and had never once been worn. And your hands were doing the thing hands do in that moment, which is move faster than thought and still feel impossibly slow. The reconstruction identifies the second wave as the critical sequence. The first wave, the investigation concludes, was a ranging salvo. That is the clinical reading. 5 ballistic missiles launched not primarily to destroy, but to draw interceptor capacity, to map the response timing, to force the Patriot batteries to expend missiles and reveal coverage gaps. The first wave was the diagnostic. The second wave was the application of what the diagnostic revealed. You will read this analysis much later and sit with one word for a long time: diagnostic. The second wave arrived at 3:44, 7 missiles in the sequence. The intercept record shows 5 confirmed successful engagements, 2 tracked to impact. 1 struck the eastern perimeter in an area used for logistics support and fuel storage. The secondary explosion from the fuel storage is what the base emergency response teams would later describe as the event that defined their night, not the initial strike, the fire that followed it. The other missile impacted near the flight line. The reconstruction is careful here. It does not overstate. The flight line damage was significant but not catastrophic in the operational sense. Several aircraft sustained damage. The ramp area bore the primary force of impact. Operational tempo was reduced for approximately 72 hours before coalition assets repositioned and coverage was restored across the theater. The numbers in the summary look manageable. They were manageable. In a live and expanding conflict, that distinction between manageable and fine is the distance between strategy and catastrophe, and the people writing the summary knew it, and the summary does not say it. Here is the detail the reconstruction returns to twice. 3 weeks before the strike, a routine inspection of the base's early warning integration protocols identified a lag in the data handoff between theater-level missile warning architecture and station-level alert displays. The lag was documented. It was assessed as within acceptable parameters for standard operations. The phrase "acceptable parameters" appears in the inspection report 4 times. On the night of the strike, the lag meant that your display showed green for approximately 4 minutes after the first radar contact was confirmed at the system level. 4 minutes. The investigation does not describe this as a failure. It describes it as a condition, a distinction that means something in the language of after-action documentation and means something different in the language of the people who were in the building when the condition was active. You will not use the word condition. What you were doing during those 4 minutes is part of the record because your workstation logged inputs continuously and automatically. 331. You ran a standard comms check on 2 active air corridors. 333. You flagged a scheduling conflict in the following morning's sortie rotation. 0335. You sent a message to a colleague on the incoming shift about a handover note. The message read, "Just leave it in the log. I'll catch it tomorrow." The investigation does not include this message because it is not part of the causal chain, but you will remember it. You will remember the specific smallness of it, the ordinary administrative texture of those 4 minutes while the radar was already tracking what your screen had not yet been told to display. That is the weight the record cannot carry. The investigation can log the lag. It cannot log what it means to exist inside it. The shelter-in-place order reached your station at 0337. The formal timeline shows the alert cascade initiated correctly once the system handshake resolved. The order propagated across the base in under 90 seconds. Personnel accountability procedures activated. Emergency response teams deployed. The base executed what the after-action describes as a credible and coordinated response under active threat conditions. You were in the southwest corridor of the CAOC when the order came through. You moved to the designated shelter position. You counted the personnel near you. You did what the training said to do. The training worked in the specific way that training works. It occupied the space where thought would have been too slow. What training does not occupy is the interval between the second and third detonation, when the lights in the corridor flickered and something in the ceiling shifted, and the person next to you grabbed your arm without saying anything and did not let go until the lights steadied. Nobody writes that in a report, but it is in the record in the sense that memory is a record. In the sense that the person who grabbed your arm will never need to explain it to you. In the sense that you will recognize each other across crowded rooms for the rest of your careers with a recognition that has no official designation. The fire on the eastern perimeter burned for 4 hours and 31 minutes. You could not see it from inside the CAOC, but you could see it on the situational display once the screens were restored. A heat signature occupying the lower right quadrant of the base map, persistent and expanding before it finally began to contract. You watched it while running personnel accountability checks. You watched it while relaying coordination requests between units trying to confirm status across the base. Watching a fire on a screen while speaking to people who might be near that fire is a particular kind of cognitive experience that does not have a common name. You carry out each task correctly. You record each confirmation. You route each request. And in the background of each of those actions, the signature in the lower right corner of the display stays where it is, orange and patient, and you do not look at it directly, and you do not stop looking at it. 2 people died in the eastern perimeter zone. Both were civilian contractors. Both were in the fuel storage area when the secondary explosion occurred. The investigation determines they were performing a routine overnight maintenance check that was scheduled, documented, and in no way connected to the threat picture developing above them in that moment. They were performing their assigned duties. The investigation uses that phrase exactly. It is language constructed to confer dignity, and it does, and it will also occupy a specific location in your chest for a long time. The reconstruction addresses strategic intent at length, what Iranian planners understood about Al-Udeid. What the design of the strike sequence reveals is that the base did not need to be destroyed to achieve the objective. The objective was demonstration. The demonstration was a single, legible fact that a facility considered effectively protected by the most advanced theater missile defense systems the United States deploys could be reached. That the distance between protected and unreachable was measurable in interceptors expended, in coverage gaps exposed, in a fire burning for 4 hours in the lower right quadrant of your screen. The strike was not an attempt to end the conflict. It was proof that ending it was possible. The after-action says this, not in those words, but in those words. In the days after, the base ran on a different frequency, not panic, the opposite of panic, a high-functioning suppression that looked like professionalism and was partly professionalism and was partly something else. The way executing familiar tasks with extreme care is also a way of not fully processing what just happened around those tasks. People worked longer, spoke less between tasks, did their jobs with a precise focus that read as control. You checked your workstation display more than you needed to, not compulsively, maybe every 11 minutes instead of every 20. You did not notice the change consciously. A colleague mentioned it 2 weeks later, framed lightly. You laughed. You did not stop. The investigation's final section contains specific systemic recommendations, alert integration timelines, maintenance prioritization schedules, intercept resource allocation, threat reclassification protocols, each one specific, technical, and correct in the way that corrections made after the fact are always technically correct. What the recommendations cannot reach is the 312 login, the green screen, the 4 minutes, the message about leaving something in the log. Those belong to a different kind of record. Here is what the reconstruction formally establishes. The base survived. The CAOC sustained 0 structural damage. Operations resumed within 72 hours. Coalition air coverage was maintained. The missile defense systems performed within their design parameters. The 2 fatalities were fully investigated. The systemic gaps were identified and scheduled for remediation. By every official measure, the response was adequate. That word will follow you. Adequate. You will hear it in briefings. You will read it in summaries. You will sit across from people who use it as a conclusion and understand that for them, it closes something, and understand equally that for you, it opens a question you do not yet have language for. The 347 entry in your workstation log, the first entry after the shelter in place was partially lifted, the first thing you typed when the screens came fully back online, is a standard comms check. Correct format, accurate execution. The log reflects nothing unusual. Nobody reading that log will know your hands were shaking when you ran it. Nobody needs to know. That is also what the record shows. The scale of what it does not show. The fire on the eastern perimeter left a thermal scar on the ramp surface that remained visible in satellite imagery for months after the remediation was complete. A residual darkness in the concrete that the repair work did not fully erase. You never saw it directly. You were redeployed before the cruise finished, but you saw the imagery. Someone on your team pulled it up during a planning session 3 months later, zoomed into the base layout for a completely separate operational reason, and there it was. Lower right quadrant, the same position it had occupied on your display the night it was burning. A smaller shape now, a shadow of what it had been. The same location. You did not say anything. You looked at it for the length of time it takes to register a detail and return to the task. Then you returned to the task. The record does not capture what you understood in that moment, whether it was confirmation of something you had already accepted or the first real instant of full comprehension. The distance between a green screen and the reality that screen is supposed to represent. What the record shows is that the planning session continued. What the record shows is that you were listed as a participant. What the record shows is that you logged out at 1744, a normal close to a measured shift, in a building designed to survive that had survived, at a base that was struck and kept going, in a conflict that had not yet received its official name. The record shows you were there. It does not show what that cost. That part belongs to you. Not to the log, not to the after action, not to the word adequate, which will keep appearing in documents written by people who were not in the Southwest Corridor when the lights flickered. To you. And the record will never be complete without it.